Hey there, folks. Welcome to the first session of a new run of the Gauntlet Reading Club. This is a slightly strange version of the Gauntlet Reading Club, as due to some last minute drops, everyone recruited through the Gauntlet left. And so this is a Gauntlet Reading Club with no one from the Gauntlet on it. But I'm Steven, he, him. I'm going to be facilitating this session of the reading club and GMing our run of Beam Saber continuing forward. For this particular run, we're doing Beam Saber, and we are reading the book Genesis of Misery by Neon Yang.
Neon Yang.
Yep, and it is a space opera with mechs and a lot of queer people in it. Kind of loosely kind of a retelling of the historical figure of Joan of Arc. And kind of we'll go around and kind of do our first impressions. My first impression, I enjoyed a lot about this book. I definitely I've read all of Neon Yang's other novellas. This is their first kind of full-length novel, and I thought there's a lot of neat things it does that kind of builds on their past stuff. Okay, but the one thing I will note, and this will come up in the second half, I wish there were cooler mechs. I realize I like a lot of what they do with mechs in this, but at the same time, I kind of am like, they don't all get their own like special weapons. I mean, that's just me being an annoying mech nerd. But yeah, we'll go around, do clockwise for me. So it'll be Chris, Cricket, Roy, and then Victor. If you could introduce your name, your pronouns, and then what are your first thoughts about the book?
Hi, I'm Chris. He, him, they pronouns. First thoughts about the book. I have not finished it. I was a late arrival and I got it and was really into it at first. But like I think I have the same thing a lot of I get this with a lot of sci-fi stories where I'm like really into like the world they're building and like what they've done, but not particularly engaged in the story or the protagonist, who I kind of don't like. I don't really have any specific reason for that. I just was like, um, very what's his face in Final Fantasy X, kind of that vibe, if you know what I mean. I don't even know his name. I haven't
It's
even
not
gotten to the mech
Sephiroth
parts yet.
or
What was that?
Sephiroth or I don't know.
Cletus, I want to say.
Yeah, I don't
Cletus.
know.
Not
Okay,
Cletus.
there you go.
I cannot believe I know that because I watched a roommate play that, 17 years ago. So,
It's not Cletus, but it's like
no,
Cloudus or
Tidus,
something.
or Cloud.
Yeah,
Cloud is 7.
Oh, well, whatever. Anyway, sorry.
That doesn't
Yeah.
matter. He sucked. I didn't like him. So, but that's not. I'm glad I don't know his name. Genesis. It seems cool. I haven't even gotten to the mech parts yet. But according to Steven, they suck too. So, the cover is this really cool guy or gal.
To clarify, I don't think they suck. I just wanted them to be cooler.
Yeah, I want to be this. Is this the mech? What is this?
Yeah. They're all that. They're kind of, the thing is, all the mechs are like that.
Are they made out of the like Holy Stone stuff?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I'm on like page 100 and I still am not really sure what the Holy Stone is or what's going on. And like I don't want to nag on the book too much because I'm really into it and I haven't finished it yet and I can't there's a lot of books that I was like kind of struggling through, and then when I get to the end I'm like, heck yeah, that was great. I haven't read any of this author's stuff. What are their pronouns?
They, them.
They, them. Okay. I had a similar feeling with it's P. Djeli Clark, I think, who did Master of Jin. which has a lot of really cool novellas in this like other world. But then I got to the like main novel that they wrote, and I was like, oh, this isn't as good. But yeah, so I don't have a lot of thoughts. I think the Holy Stone stuff is really cool. I'd like to like work with that, like use of like minerals or things that aren't typically considered in like mecha anime and like stories. Um, I don't understand how the powers quite work, but I think that'd be something to play with, especially like if we're using that as a proxy for the I forget what they call it, like the net thing in
They
Beat
use
Saber.
AR in
Yeah, the AR, like I think it'd be cool. Because I feel like the AR never really works quite in a way that like translates well. Like people only use it for computers, but it'd be cool to have it like something in the real world. Um, Less into the like religiosity. I think that'd be nice to have like something as a faction like that, but like not quite as hardcore. But like the idea of like the void sickness as like a thing, and then also the heretics who are like, this isn't holiness, it's science. I think that's a cool aspect to bring into it. So those are my thoughts.
cool. And then yeah, Cricket, do you want to introduce yourself,
Me.
your pronouns, and your thoughts?
Sure. I'm Cricket. My pronouns are they, them. I don't, kind of like Christopher, don't have a lot of thoughts on the book right now. I'm gonna but give full disclosure, I had an eye infection. So reading was not ideal for me, but
You
um,
had what?
you know, I had an eye infection for like
Oh,
the
gross.
past
Okay,
week. Yeah, it's been not fun.
cool. Are you
So
better?
reading was not fun. Getting there.
Okay.
But so for the most part though, I agree I don't want heavy religious elements in probably in the campaign. I do
Mhm.
appreciate that they incorporated those elements, being that it's based off of Joan of Arc, and in that time period that was a huge thing, and there's the whole internal struggle of, do I believe this, do I not believe this, with
Mhm.
Misery. I think that's really cool. um and then the prophetic stuff that I don't know, do I believe this, do I not, am I crazy, which also plays into Joan of Arc having these visions and things like that too. So that was really cool, I liked that. Yeah, not sure if I totally love like the vibe of the mechs in this, but I like get what they're going for. So kind of agree also with Steven. Like I feel like they could have been executed differently, or maybe again had more of a customization to each, pilot in some
Mhm.
way. I think that would have made it more interesting. But yeah, other than that, I don't have a ton of thoughts on it. Apologies.
Can someone describe what the mechs are, just so I understand more about them?
They are like alien, like they are alien technology that is, I
Cool.
mean, they all like the Empire Force is like, these are gifts from the Lyric's Forge, but they are alien technology that is like that they're not made by the humans. They are always sort of found. And they're all designed with like alien physiology and psychology in mind, so it's very difficult to pilot them, because you
Mhm.
have to, like, when you're interfacing with them, you have to like imagine having extra sets of limbs.
Yeah, I think they're eight-limbed,
Yeah,
eight-limbed, somewhat, otherwise humanoid in shape.
and they
And
also
the
some
pilot's
of
in the chest.
yeah, and it's also not clear, but at least some of them have sentience.
Okay.
Yeah, even if it is a kind of sentience where like I really need to have a pilot to complete me. Like
Like
that's what
divine
I
kind of
want.
sometimes. Do you
Yeah.
guys watch Friends at the Table? Listen to
Uh I have not
Yeah.
watched that particular one, but yes, Victor has.
I mean, so the one other thing is that there are two types of mechs basically. There is the standard mech and the Archangel mechs, which are, which the best girl in this book gets.
Oh yeah, and then of course there are also like it's not really made clear to me, but there's also mention of like things like construction mechs and agricultural mechs. And I don't know if those are also alien technology or if those ones are like made by people.
Mm-hmm.
Or I mean I should say like the people of the empire.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it seems since you have to have special
Yeah.
qualities, which is something that I think we should move away from in our own campaign
Oh,
to
yeah.
operate a mech. That probably the more mundane labor mechs couldn't possibly. Like,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
holy stone, and what's holy
Yeah,
about
that's
labor?
fair. That's fair. But anyway, Roy. Sorry.
No worries. Yeah, I'm Roy. I use he, him pronouns. Yeah, I echo what Chris said. I appreciated the world building. I've been trying to get a Scum and Villainy game together recently, and was
Yes.
trying to like wrap my head around to some degree the rich cult atmosphere of Blades in the Dark. I was having a little bit hard time wrapping my head around how that would translate into Scum and Villainy, trying to think of like Firefly or Star Wars and how cults work in that. And so I was trying to come up with kind of a background for how that might work. And I've really felt in the book, there was a really interesting take on all of that, which obviously was not the problem trying to be solved by the author of this book, but it's like to have holiness and occultishness and eldritch unknowable intelligences as a source of interesting technology. It really echoed some of my thoughts in terms of how to kind of shoehorn that into Scum and Villainy. So I was really excited by all of that. Yeah, so yeah, world building I thought was really cool, interesting, fresh take for me at least. And yeah, I kind of I got in last second, and I really appreciate being added in. I listened to a bunch of the book at 1.5 speed and then a bunch of the book at double speed, trying to speed get through it. So I got through about 2/3 of it, and I retained as much as possible. I was like working, but doing manual labor all week, listening to this thing in like high speed in my ear, and so I absorbed a lot of atmosphere and some really awesome ideas. But yeah, I apologize if there's any specifics that I missed as I was power listening to it. But yeah, there's a lot of great stuff that I think will be fun to explore. Yeah, in terms of the portrayal of religion or religiosity, like full disclosure, I'm a left-wing Catholic, so I'll let everybody try to understand what the hell that contradiction could even mean. But I was raised by a left-wing Catholic, so I have very mixed feelings about the church that I'm a part of, much like the country that I'm a part of. It's a mixed bag at best. The past and the current and the future are all quite embarrassing in a lot of respects, but also it's what I am. So, but I felt so there's to me portrayals of there's a lot of echoes of religion, and especially the Catholic Church specifically, in a lot of media, including in this book. And there can be like a really trite, simple, like ham-fisted critiques, which are just kind of banal to me. Like to me, Kevin Smith's his big, somewhat controversial post Clerks one where Matt Damon's an angel. Dogma. Yeah, it was like, hey, did you know that people are kind of bored in church? It's like, oh dang, Kevin, you got him. Like, it was, that's not a deep, profound critique. Where I felt like it was more nuanced in this book, like interesting, like why are people drawn to that? Why
Yeah.
is the abuse of dogma and power and all that? Like, so I am not at all against critique of the church or allusions to the church. I am crazy aware of all the problems, history, present, and the future of the church. But yeah, I appreciate when it's done with a little bit of nuance, or to say like, I like being left wing, like the idea that no one of any intelligence could ever draw anything from religion. It just is like, to me, dismissive of me, but more importantly to my entire family, to huge swaths of people all around the world that you know, help the passing of their most loved people with, you know, they find elements in spite of the horrible actions of the hierarchy as a whole that so anyway, that's I'm in no way want to say for me any critique of the church is off limits, because that's not how I feel, but yeah, just some level of nuance to it I appreciate.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not, I'm left of liberal, so whatever that means. Yeah, and I'm just I love Forge in the Dark games, and I'm really excited to be here and explore.
Yes.
And I know I don't own Beam Saber. I own a lot of other Forge in the Dark games. I've read about Beam Saber. I'm so yeah. Anyway, I'm off topic, but excited to keep exploring this with all of you.
Yes.
Great. And yeah, I'm Victor. I use he, him pronouns. Chris, you know, the arc that you're describing so far is exactly where I was. I did finish the book, but you know, it was a struggle, and it was only thanks to the holiday break that I was able to finish the book, because it was like, all right, I am away from my home, in my family's home, and so I must find comfort in literature at times. So that, you know, that, yes, it is that kind of, you know, I have to be bereft of my technology for me to finish a book or finish literature. And so yeah, you know, that was part of why I was so excited to do this. It was like, ah, yes, put a gun to my head and make me finish a goddamn sci-fi novel. Yes, please, because that is just something that in my middle age I have moved away from, regrettably. You know, and yeah, so like I struggled with this and then came to really enjoy it and would absolutely read a sequel to this novel, I think, provided that there was a book club that was going to force me to read, you know, actually finish another novel. Um, you know, in terms of, since the topic of religion and the depiction of religion came up, like, you know, I am with you politically, Roy, but you know, I'm on the opposite end in terms of spirituality. But I also enjoyed how faith was depicted and the nuance. And one thing that I really loved, you know, one thing that pushed me away from organized religion is just all of the you know, the hangups around sex, and to see a bunch of super religious people take part in an orgy without then going to going to a CPAC convention afterwards. You know, that was nice to see. You know, see people who you know, can you know, have religious faith and, you know, still dominate people in different ways, like, you know, through money and power and all that, but at least, you know, the you know, no longer dominating people based on gender identity and sexuality, and you know, and so yeah, there's just a bunch of anime poly bi you know, people of multiple pronouns who also happen to be like bishops and popes and shit. That was pretty fun. um So I enjoyed that quite a bit. You know, I think it's fine for us to not have that as a major part of our, you know, of our, like, our squad doesn't need to be a bunch of paladins or anything, but I think that it would be fun to have, you know, at least the, you know, like, it's also just a classic of, you know, like empires and space religion and, you
Oh
know,
yeah.
yeah, you know, and people just trying to make a bunch of money off of the fight there. Now, one thing about the end that thematically I think would be fun to see show up, so I don't know if you guys want me to talk about that since you haven't finished the book
I'm
yet,
fine.
but
But
Yeah,
up
Chris,
to everybody else.
yeah, I mean, so you know, I think that, you know, as Stephen alluded to, this is also you know, you know, this is also about alien technology and AI, and that, you know, and that being, you know, one man's God is another person's, you know, designed super intelligence. And so you know, I think that having those themes of, you know, yeah, artificial intelligence and the threat that artificial intelligence and alien intelligences, you know, or the perceived threat to humanity, I think is a fun tension to explore.
But yeah, cool. Um, so actually something you were touching on, like I'll step back usually to let other people talk, but just to kind of start things up. Something you were kind of touching on, Victor, which is like the power of domination and like the use of power. Like because it struck me as such a interesting part of like the novel. And this I definitely think gets to Chris's, you brought up the dislike of Misery, and I think it's kind of fair because Misery in a lot of ways is an awful person. Like she like every time she sort of gets and uses power, it always seems like a misuse or abuse of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like she has the power to like mold holy stone, so she kills a bunch of people with it. Or like it's also, and this is again spoilers, if I'd say both for people here, and if you're watching and you did not think there were going to be spoilers, it's okay. Like there's also the implication that she is an empath and that she does have psychic powers. And like
Mm-hmm.
that's why everyone always seems like an open book to her. And she's like, why don't the rest of you just understand how like obvious you're all being? Like she ends up using that all throughout the novel to just manipulate and use everyone around her. Like that's sort of like beyond like her connection to the mech. That seems to be like her lever on everyone. I'm wondering what people kind of thought about the way kind of power takes up in the novel.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead if you want.
No, go for it. I'll remember.
Power like on an individual level or on a total?
Like there, I think either, because there is like institutional power and the way that it is brought up in the novel, but I definitely feel like there's also a lot about how individual characters try to
Mm-hmm.
exercise power um over their own lives. And I think there's also some other things we could talk about there that are connected to that question. But like
Yeah.
whether you can like there, I think there is even the question in the novel, like can you actually wield power in your own life that isn't in some way like abetted by institutional power, you could say.
Well, I think Misery is a good example of that because she kind of, I think, frames herself as being like a like poor soul, both like I think somewhat impoverished and like also like had a hard upbringing, but then also mentions that her brother got her out of a lot of jams from being connected to the like church, basically. Um, and then that kind of like shows the institution of that power too, where you can kind of like it's kind of I feel like a lot of this might be an extreme comparison, but like a lot of people that like early on joined the Nazi party were able to get the societal benefits from it before it became more of a like mandatory regime.
I was just going to say, well, I guess that brings up an interesting. I'm not sure the total accuracy of this, but having taken a little bit of Russian in college, what I learned there, and I correct me if anybody knows this is wrong, but that they're in still today or as of whatever early 2000s, Russian culture on a phone call, they are very abrupt at ending phone calls, and that goes back to Soviet times when keeping the phone line open could mean life and death for somebody. If somebody says they've been taken, you need to get your local party official and start the process to get this person, the higher ups, to give this blessing and get this person out of it. Like having always keeping your lines open to the powers that be was literally the difference between life and death, under Soviet rule. So that idea of living in a somewhat totalitarian, is that a oxymoron? Anyway, living in a society where having your hands ready to try to grasp the levers of power, or beg for intercession for the levers of power, certainly makes for a dramatic setting. And just I'm always in storytelling, but especially in role-playing games, looking for opportunities for tension, for drama in the setting. And so like living under that type of regime, there's a lot of dramatic opportunity when that much power is being wielded around you. What I was going to originally say was I had a good friend relay the story, which I strongly related to, that he had thought of himself as somebody who was always wants people to be happy and was trying to get people to a happy state around him, friends, in groups, and thought of himself as like, what a good person am I? I always want other people to be happy. And then had a friend say, after he related a specific story, seeing yourself as a really good person who wants others to be happy is one way to look at that. Another way to look at that is you are manipulative as fuck, that you want to shove people's emotions to where you think they should be, and you'll do anything to get them there, so that tension between an empath, I guess maybe this is only tangentially related, but I of course related to this idea that being empathetic and understanding where people's emotions are, and maybe what it would take to get them to a state where I think they should be. I think on the one hand, our culture would say that as, wow, what a swell person. They're always thinking of others. And on the other hand, is like, this very much like not a marionette, what's the word I'm looking for? Somebody trying to manipulate everybody around them to the
Puppet
state
master.
Yeah, puppet master, exactly. Yeah, trying to manipulate everybody to where I think they should be, and of course, for me to come off looking great at the end of all that to everybody around me. So, anyway, maybe only tangentially related, but that line between empathy and manipulation is interesting to explore for sure.
I agree. I am a huge fan of the show Survivor, and a lot of what you're talking about, it's part of that because you're going to send people out that are then going to have to vote for you. So how do you manipulate these people, but also leave them with a positive feeling about you, right? So it's the same thing. And going back to, which is when I wanted to kind of touch on with the religion subject as well. Like, I don't mind having some of that present. I don't mind having some of that moral play. Now, for my character, probably won't be as actively involved with that kind of stuff, but I don't mind having that moral play. And like you're saying, with having the drama and the tension, I like having stakes. I like having sort of that moral play involved in there. I like having these powers that be that are kind of at war, and where do we fit in the middle? And that we talked about this last week a little bit when I was talking about Dark Matter, which is a show that I really like. And they sort of play in this sort of corporatocracy sort of battle between different allegiances that they had before they lost their memories, and then now they're trying to exist in a moral gray zone. And that's something that I really like exploring in tabletop settings, is having a sort of morally ambiguous group, or a group with a bunch of different alignments or viewpoints, and how they navigate to compromise to kind of seek the best solution for whatever situation is presented. And I think that's where I think is the most fun bits of tabletop role play, is seeing what everyone's bringing and how we can all work together to kind of find those little narrative hooks that continue things in maybe in a way that nobody is expecting too.
Is I don't want to go off into a fruitless direction, but I don't know if people have seen the movie The Messenger. It's not great, but it's Luc Besson it's a movie about Joan of Arc with Mila Jovovich back in the day. Most of it's not great, but she has visions that lead her on this mission to become the Joan of Arc of history. And there's some really interesting elements where she's, spoilers for this 25-year-old movie if you're planning to finally get around to watching it this week, but she's in her jail cell awaiting her execution, and visions come to her, and it's Dustin Hoffman as visiting her and like saying, like, starting to make her question all of her visions, saying like she feels like she was in a field there, and she found this sword, and it was given to her by God as a sign of her mission. And then he like just starts berating her, saying like, of all the ways that that sword could have come to be there, it could have been this, and it's somebody riding on a horse and the sword falls off, or it could have been this, two people fighting in the middle of the field and one guy gets killed and he throws the sword, or it could have even been this, and a guy just walking in the field and just throws his sword for no reason into the field. Of all the possible explanations, you chose this one. And clouds open, the light pours down, and a sword descends from heaven into the field. And it's like, who are you in your arrogance to think that? And it's this really great, like, that, you know, messianic versus like mental illness. And not to shoehorn this conversation or whatever, just totally left turn this conversation, but I often see mental illness as either a trigger warning or lines and veils. Often people want to be careful around that, how that's chosen, and maybe it's not even relevant to our story or this game. But I feel like they did that in the book. That line between she feels this is an illness and it's corrupting her, and then comes to find this may not have been an illness. This may have actually been something legitimate. I find that to be a really fruitful, you know, in terms of me trying to figure out how the fuck I feel about this insane church that I was brought up in. You know, what is the line between what we just want to believe versus, you know, what is actually real in the world or good for the world, and you know, characters struggling that I would find compelling. But mental illness is often a tough subject, and it can be done so, again, in a trite, disrespectful way. So the last thing I would want. But and this may not even be a worthy discussion, Stephen, for where you want to go with the game and this narrative. So please just nip it in the butt if it's not even what we should be talking about. But just put that out there.
This part we're just talking about the book, our thoughts about it. We
Yeah,
can
and
talk more
I had
about
the
what
same.
we specifically want to like see in the book, our game later.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, if an individual player wants to explore those themes, then great. You know, yeah, I was definitely curious about how others thought about, you know, about that, you know, the main character viewing themselves as, you know, as being mentally ill, and, you know, how that was handled by the author. Because I, you know, I have anxiety disorders, but I don't have, you know, DID. And so, you know, and I'm not asking anyone to divulge anything about themselves that they wouldn't want to. But, you know, if anyone has more experience with that, you know, I'm curious if, you know, if anyone has any thoughts on that. Because, you know, I was sort of torn between, like, is this a, you know, like, basically, because it's not my issue. It's like, would someone who does experience this, or who has people in their lives who are experiencing this, you know, would they feel respected by this depiction? And, you know, that's just not something that I have an answer to. Because it can definitely be an easy, thoughtless
it
trope.
depends on the approach. I definitely agree. As long as I feel like it's done respectfully and not just like, oh, look at this cool unique thing about my character, you know, I think that that's fine. With it being sort of, and you know, maybe it's not a specific mental illness that we're aware of. Even it could be expressing itself in a unique way. Maybe you don't put a label on it, but if you want to play with those kinds of themes, as like I said, as long as it's done respectfully and with integrity, I don't have a problem with that. I would maybe shy away from, like I said, putting a label on what it is that they're experiencing, because maybe they're going through it, they don't know about it. Maybe that's the way to approach it.
Well, I was talking more about just the book and how people felt
No,
about
yeah, that. But I was talking about if anyone's, because he was talking about playing with that concept. So I think if you play with that concept, maybe you don't put a label on it. Maybe we don't necessarily say that it's DID or bipolar or anything like that specifically, but just how they're having that internal conflict. I would be interested to see it. as like I said, as long as it's done with respect and integrity, I think that that's fine. Because anything internal with your character, it's just going to add more to the story. So
Yeah, and I, for in terms of how I was relating to the book, it did like I am not like particularly well read on the subject, but it did remind me of a little bit of some of Esme Wei-Jun Wang's writings on the subject. She wrote essay collection My Collected Schizophrenias, where she sort of talks about the tension as someone who suffers from delusions between knowing a delusion is false but still believing it's true, because that's sort of the tension that the delusions operate on. And I do feel like it plays into a lot of the relationship that at least I saw playing out in that uh uh Misery has with her own visions. And I mean, in some ways also, I guess you could say, plays into sort of some of the tension about her character, but she's a character that goes from pretending to believing her visions to eventually believing her visions after pretending for such a long time.
I was just going to add, I think there's a, I don't know if this is a ridiculous analogy, but like, I almost wonder if I could like draw a spectrum where like trite, ridiculous, stupid depictions of mental illness, and then I don't know. May not be a particularly a clinically correct portrayal, but I did find like I tried to watch the movie Joker with Joaquin Phoenix, and unfortunately that was, in my mind, pretty talented director, writer, actor, musicians, like a very, very, very potent, visceral depiction of someone under crushing pressure, stress, and with some potentially mental illness in the background. And I could not watch that movie because I'm like, congratulations, you very effectively portrayed this crisis moment for this character, and I can't fucking watch this. This is too intense for me. Like
I agree.
And it was, in their familiar territory, and what Stephen just mentioned about that line between knowing something is, and I think there's a degree to which is not on the spectrum of mental illness at all, of saying like, I say I'm a giant fucking piece of shit because I made a small mistake. Now, intellectually, I know that's not true. I would never describe anybody else as a piece of shit for making a small mistake at work. So I know that's intellectually not true. And yet in my heart, absolutely might believe that statement. So that, and it goes into larger areas than that. But yeah, that tension is super interesting and personally relevant for me. But yeah, I to me in the book, the portions that I read were an interesting middle ground where it wasn't like so intense and visceral that it was uncomfortable to inhabit what the author was exploring with it. And I didn't feel like it was disrespectful and trite. I thought it was a happy middle ground to me.
Yeah.
So is the DID thing, this is, I guess, a spoiler for the book, the thing with the shade, or?
I mean that, yeah, so is ruin is ruin real or not is the big question. And what is again, to the people at home, spoiler alert, what it is revealed is that ruin is the AI that is connected to the Archangel mech. So basically, yeah. So, and that basically, what we have been watching a protagonist manipulate all these people throughout the entire book, and it turns out then that she was manipulated by her mech the entire time. and that this was all
That's
a
interesting.
large arc to get a medallion from a random rock in space through a portal to some alien technology so that they could be together and one again.
Cool.
Yeah. And that actually it is like the other thing I found, and this is kind of something that Neon Yang has touched on before in their series of novellas, the Tensorate series. Like the tension between like, and this is also why I like Beam Saber for this, like the tension between like, I guess, fate and individual will, because like fate here kind of interpreted widely, because I think they play with this idea of fate, but interpreting fate as also being like the historical social forces that make us what we are. But to what degree are we individual actors making decisions, and to what degree are we just kind of these pieces within historical arc that are just like playing out our kind of the roles we've been kind of written into.
Yeah. I wanted to bring it back to the thing about mental illness. Understanding more because I wasn't sure if it was going to be like, oh no, actually this was a delusion the whole time, which I think would be a little bit bad. But like I definitely identify, I don't have any delusion-y things or like hallucinations, but I have bipolar disorder, and there's a lot of times where I'm in a mood and I'm like, is this really how I feel, or is this my body making me feel this way? And I'm not sure.
Right.
And I can totally identify with that, like in the character where like Misery is like, do I have the void sickness? Am I just like crazy? What's going on? Like,
Yeah,
like gaslighting yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, and people's opinions about, for my sake, like, no, you're so much more fun when you're outgoing and happy, and I'm like,
Oh yeah.
yeah, that is more convenient for you. I can see that. But like some days
It can be
that's not on
convenient for
tap.
me too. Yeah.
Right. And all, and to be like, but like if I'm in a different state, that's bullshit. Nobody wants that you around here. Get to that other guy. We like that guy better. Like, shit, I'm sorry. I'll conjure him. Let me get him in here. Can you teach me how to be a better person, and so I could be just like you? Like, yeah, that I agree. It was there's a fruitful exploration there.
Cool. So we're coming up on the hour mark. So something I wanted to check in on before we took our break. Was there anything that folks wanted to touch on, or thoughts about the book they want to express they haven't gotten a chance to? I like to go around, just we'll go counterclockwise this time because I put Chris on the spot the first time. Just thoughts or things you want to talk about the book that we haven't yet. And then we'll take our break. Victor, do you have anything you wanted to bring up or things you wanted to throw out for discussion?
So one thing that I really loved from the book was when the ghost, or what were they called, the saint squad mate asked for an explanation of Misery's pronouns, in part because it was like, oh shit, that actually really resonates. Like I use he him, but the explanation for why Misery uses she they really resonated with me. Of this, it's like, yeah, because like in my professional life, my genitalia means nothing, so like they might as well call me they, because it's like I'm here to work, like and so like that idea that like, yeah, my, using he, or using, using the pronouns that I grew up with the people who grew up with me, or that is a extra layer of intimacy to use she her in Misery's case, you know that was fascinating to me, and I really like that. And I still use he, him, but I think that if I were to switch to he, they, it would be for precisely or along the same lines of what Misery was describing in the novel. So I really appreciated and enjoyed that.
Yeah, Roy, did you have anything you want to throw out for discussion or other thoughts?
I absolutely echo what Victor just said. I mean, yeah, I'm pretty new to exploring deeper kind of concepts of gender in terms of the broader culture. I'm certainly personally aware of what has been expected of me and the thousand ways I don't fit with what is expected of me or what people assume looking at me and like, fun story, you're totally wrong. But anyway, good try. But so I appreciate I also read uh Black Sun by I think Rebecca Roanhorse,
Mhm.
and I thought it had interesting gender exploration in there. And yeah, I just I'm a genre nerd. I love sci-fi fantasy stuff, and I love bringing in other interesting threads into the comfortable genre stuff that I'm used to and familiar with. So I love those are a couple recent examples. But yeah, I thought that was it was well done in the book. And it, just somewhat sort of a dumb thing, but I do think it's interesting when authors or movies just use like the structure of religiosity as cultural touch points, like so like calling like regular I don't know if the regular mechs were like seraphim and then the more powerful mech is the archangel. Like it's just like in interest, like we know that archangels are more powerful angels, so like as a common cultural uh skeleton that you can like scaffold off of. I found that interesting. But yeah, no, I've definitely appreciated those touch points.
Although to that point, when it is revealed why the squads are called servings, and it's because the units are called banquets, and it's like, okay, well then who's cutlery? What are the plates? Like who's the cups? It's that part was sort of dumb to me. But I agree with you that when they're pulling the religious hierarchy type stuff, I love that.
I
Yeah.
never got to the explanation of the word serving, and I was like, serving. Am I hearing that? As I'm listening to it at double speed, like serving? Is it serving? Why serve? So that's I appreciate understanding the thought there.
Am I up next then, I guess?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I agree with everyone else's sentiments about misery and their gender expression. As someone that is AMAB identifying non-binary, definitely agree. Like for me, it really puts me off if people like intentionally emasculate me by like using she her pronouns. Because I don't feel necessarily female. I know I have a lot of feminine energy to me. I sit somewhere in the middle ground. That's just where I am, and I'm okay with that. But I'm also AMAB, and again not really like looking to change my gender, but um, definitely free in how I express it. So I'm identifying non-binary now, just to kind of see how that feels for me. So that definitely resonates with me. Um, just as like, okay, well, then don't use gendered speech because gendered speech makes me feel a certain type of way, and I respect using that in a professional environment because that's sort of my thing as well in a similar way as what you guys are talking about. Like, my friend Bethany is also sort of androgynous, non-binary, but also isn't afraid to let people use she, her pronouns for her when it's in a personal setting. Um, but also has that sort of distinction. So I feel like that is interesting to see gender because it is a very personal thing. It's something I don't want you thinking about me in these terms if it's going to be, taken in this way or painted in this narrative, or you're going to use it to like degrade me or anything like that. So I do think there is a bit of empowerment in saying, No, you don't get to use gendered words for me. You can call me they them.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
then yeah, we can go with Chris. That's about all I have to say on it. But yeah.
No, yeah, I
I
hadn't necessarily thought through it that way, but I like that idea of empowerment there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't have a lot more thoughts on the book specifically. It's interesting they get to that the like especially from a first person like is normally you wouldn't get although does is it like you say the part in the book Misery is explaining this to someone else?
Yeah, she's explaining it, or yeah, I guess I don't know Misery, so they are explaining it to one of their squad mates, because basically Misery gets assigned to a squad, a suicide squad of various types of criminals and rejects who are expendable to be put to go do special operations to save the empire.
Hmm.
And so one of those is a saint, so a synthetic being, who, or at least that's what it seems like, right? These are either uh, are like, yeah,
Well, I
yeah,
think
yeah,
Saint in the book is used to
they're like
refer to
cloned.
all of them that have
Oh, you're
the
right, you're right. Yeah, yeah,
ability to
you're right.
manipulate. But
Right, yeah.
then there's a big like it's very kind of scandalous in the novel, but at the heart of the empire, they are like trying to genetically engineer like artificial
Right,
saints.
yes, thank you. Yeah, that's what it is. And they are visually distinct, easily identifiable. Um,
That's
and
giving me
so
like Hana vibes.
Hana
Did y'all ever
vibes?
watch Hana with
Oh,
Saoirse Ronan and Eric Bana, and they're like trying to genetically engineer super soldiers, and then he raises her to like end up like because she was genetically engineered to be a super soldier, but he takes her away and raises her, trains her, and then uses her to get back at the company that created her. So that's a whole thing. But yeah, like that kind of idea is really interesting to me too.
yeah, and definitely an interesting potential background for a character in our Beam Saber game. Um, but so this created being is adult in form but not in experience, and so is interested in what how people live, and so asks this question of why exactly are you he they, or she they rather.
Yeah, I think it's interesting just because normally like you don't get that to into that discussion with people unless you're closer with them. Um so like I was considering I was like wonder what like Misery's situation is. Like I also use they sometimes. Almost from like a different standpoint where I like was grew up he him and then like kind of had a lot of issues with that growing up. Just like never being masculine enough kind of thing. And now I think as an adult, I'm actually more so identifying with that, and it's interesting. But then also like I don't want to limit myself in a way, so I think they is sometimes appropriate. Um, but yeah, I noticed in the book that they do very explicitly name pronouns of characters, sort of like in an omniscient way. I know some of them wear name tags, but I like that as just like a cultural point, um, where I think in games we normally do that for the most part, just because we're trying to explain it to
Mhm.
each other so we can talk about this character. It would be interesting if we like had a similar thing in story too, where like there's in this world people naturally
Yeah.
do this more than we do in our real world.
You say like so that it, could you I didn't quite understand what you mean. So that it's that the
Just that
explicit discussion.
just that like so like in the book I think a lot of times they explain the gender of a character or like their pronouns um kind of like while introducing the character from like the narrator's perspective. um so like it isn't said in dialogue, but like we as the audience are aware of it because it's been explained in the book. which I've never seen in any other book before. Because they could just like in a scene use their pronouns because you would be using the pronouns for like a third person character, um, and like have us figure out what it is, but like the author's making a pointed decision to like label it. Um, and we in like RPGs we do that anyway, just because we have to be aware of like what someone's genders or pronouns are, just to talk about them. But it would be cool in our setting to like have more of a purposeful like exchange of pronouns than we do in the real world. Like I know we do in some settings, but like
To have it be more
yeah,
of like an open, accepted, just norm.
Yeah,
yeah,
like in the
exactly.
book. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's totally fine to pull that in. I'm happy to do that, you know. Although to be honest, like just because it was so forwarded in the novel, it really felt like the beginning of every goddamn Zoom meeting I'm in work of, you know, where we have to all introduce ourselves and say our pronouns, and you know, it's just like, you know, hi, it's me, I'm, you know, it's just it's so it's very it was jarring but appreciated. Like I, you know, I
Yeah.
am here for this world, but also, yeah, it did remind me a little bit of my, you know, my professional life.
I kind of also had the same feeling where I was like a little bit like, oh, we don't have to do this. You can just explain it when you're like telling the story. But like I also was like, I like that there's not even a question, especially because a lot of the characters or some of the characters use like neo pronouns,
Mhm.
which at times confused me. Like the first time we were talking about Ruin, I think it was Z Zem. I know that the Saints are all Z her, right? Yeah,
Uh,
the first time we talked about Ruin, I was like, "Who's Z?" And then I realized they're using a pronoun, and I was like, "Okay,
mhm.
cool." So I guess I missed it when they explained it, but like, um, I think explaining it just means that like you're like less confused when the story's going on, and I think that's helpful.
Yeah, they were definitely using some neo pronouns in the book.
Roy, was that evident in the audiobook version?
I was just gonna say, so listening to I listened through Black Sun and the sequel, and listening to it, I've seen Z spelled out, rarely in my real life because I'm around a bunch of normie fucking old school people like me that are old as shit and can't get with the times. And
Yeah, those muggles. Oh wait, no, strike
muggles.
that.
You
Strike
Wait,
that word.
oh
Never
dear God, we're
mind.
referencing. Yeah.
Yeah, I just realized what I said,
Now
but
look, you know, like
please.
we can all say fuck J.K. Rowling and also still use the
Ri-
verbiage. It's
ri-
fine.
ri-
If anything, it's using the tools of our oppressor, right?
That's right. Owning,
There you go.
re-owning, rowling the turf.
If anything, it would piss her off probably.
Yes, yes. And
I just know that this is on a recording, so I just want to clarify. I do not support trans exclusionary
Yes, to the
radical
viewer at
feminists.
home,
It's
yeah, to
not
the
a
viewer
thing.
at home, fuck turfs, fuck J.K.
Fuck
Rowling.
turfs.
Yeah.
um, so listening to it, like Z, and it was just like I thought that was like the name. I was so confused because again, I'm like listening at 1.5 speed while doing manual labor. And I'm like, wait, what's happening right now? Whereas if it was spelled out on a page, it'd be much more obvious what I'm looking at. But I caught on. I'm old as shit and can barely learn, but eventually I do. So yeah. So in this one, I was more prepared for hearing it. I'm like, oh, I know exactly what's happening. And of course, the blurb for the book made it clear that that was going to be a theme of the book. So this time I caught it, learning again slowly, but eventually. Oh, I was just gonna say to Chris's comment too. I guess the play like games that like, oh, this is gonna take place in frontier America, but not racist because that would be lame as shit to like, or just exhausting to have. Like if we want to do a game where we're confronting racism in 1850s frontier America, that could be exhausting as shit. But if you're on board for it, great. But to say like, let's go ahead and not do that because let's have an awesome world where that's not the default. Like I'm definitely on. And sorry again, we're straying from the book discussion into what the game should be, but to underline that, I'm all about living in a better world where we don't have to like, let's just assume shitloads of people are horrible and we're going to have them be horrible during our game time, and hopefully we don't trigger anybody's traumas. Like, no, we don't have to do that. We could not do that. So
Yeah, we could have a world that's totally awesome in some ways, but also still has plenty of bullshit, because that's probably what's gonna happen.
Yeah, we can still fight with mechs without having homophobia. It's fine, like we have
Mhm.
plenty to fight about, folks. Yeah.
Unfortunately, missiles don't blow up homophobia. I wish they did, but
No, this is kind of going to a technique I picked up from the quick start of Super Meat Punks Forever, that
Extreme Meat Punks
Extreme
or
Meat Punks
whatever.
Forever, yes.
I backed that, but I don't think I paid for it, so I didn't end up getting a copy yet. But yes, I know what you're talking about.
But the quick start involves rules for because you are playing queer punks in mechs made of meat punching fascists.
Oh yeah.
So the game includes a rule that some GM advised that, like, when you're picturing fascists, like, first off, we don't need to give them names. They can always just be fascist with a hat, tall fascist, things like that. But also like, if they say something fashy, you can always just say they say something fashy. That's it. That's like, you don't need to figure out what they say. Like, we have a bunch of stuff we could fill in there.
extended
Yeah.
offensive
Maybe
homophobia
also
ensues.
safe for
Yeah.
you as GM to not put yourself in that mental
Yeah.
space either.
Yeah, I like watching what was the Quentin Tarantino Nazi beating people to death movie?
Inglorious
Inglourious
Bastards.
Bastards. To think about what it meant for who's the Christopher guy at the beginning of the movie, heckin' talented actor,
Christoph Waltz.
Christoph Waltz, getting into the mindset of that character. I'm like, oh my god, like, thank you for doing that, I guess, but holy shit, what a horrifying process that must be.
I mean,
But,
even what Heath Ledger and the Joker, even I
yeah.
mean, there's lots of you're putting yourself in an intentionally dark mindset for an extended period of time. Like that can weigh on somebody, and there's a lot of mental health stuff that comes along with that, because then you have to reconcile with the fact that you put yourself in that position, in that placement, and that can be weird. It can be a weird experience. So yeah, I totally
Yeah.
respect that as like protecting the GM as well.
Yep. Agreed.
Cool. So yeah, kind of moving into the second part of the discussion here. Something I wanted to kind of specifically have us focus in on is like what they want of what people want to see sort of make its way into our game, what we want to draw on for inspiration, what we want to change or leave out. I already kind of brought up one of my things, and this is kind of, it will be facilitated by the game we're running with Beam Saber. But I certainly wanted to see more a world where there was more variety in the mechs that people were drawing from. I do like the idea of mechs being a sort of alien found technology, but perhaps kind of mixing that up with a greater variety of mechs. I'm curious if anyone has anything else I'm going to kind of do this in the way for making notes here. I'm going to do this in sort of the making a palette like one would do from Microscope, where I'm including like yeses and nos. But I'm curious, Chris, is there anything like in particular? Well, I'll turn to you, Chris, but if you don't have any thoughts just yet, I'm just to kind of start us out.
I'm a big yes on not necessarily how they are for the holiness, but I like the idea of like stone as technology and a material that's used in tech. I think that's really cool. And for palette, I would say I kind of like the idea of like a mildly religious faction, but not like the overarching like hegemony that the one in that book is. So maybe like more like a 6 than an 11.
Yeah, I'm almost one of the things I was thinking about, and there's a keeper I sent out as part of that Google Drive folder. But something I was kind of doing for making notes of factions for myself was, since it seemed like it kind of played into the themes, separating out the crown from the sort of the faithful, and making those
Mhm.
two separate factions within the because the way Beam Saber kind of works is that there are factions, and then like which are the big
Squads.
overarching groups,
Oh yeah,
and
and
then
that too.
squads underneath it.
Mm-hmm.
And like making the crown, and like even though they're the same government nominally, they definitely have different, completely different goals as to what that government should be doing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that I'm kind of, I feel like is one way of sort of addressing that, keeping them in the fiction, but not necessarily leaving space for non-religious faction squads as well.
And like maybe like overlap too, where it's like we have we haven't really seen them yet where I am in the book, but like the heretics who are very much keeping this scientific, like maybe sharing some of the goals of the crown, but like having a different kind of outlook on that. And then the crown does like uh ascribe to like some of the religiosity, but does have their own like separate goals of it, kind of that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like a rock, paper, scissors situation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that all sounds good. One thing that I had mentioned earlier was just that, in terms of who can operate a mech, whether it be through the fiction or just because we ignore it altogether, it should be anyone can be in a mech, because that's just going to make more interesting characters, to have more interesting backgrounds, as opposed to like you are genetically predisposed to mech operation. Feels weird,
I think they should take a blood test and make sure your midichlorians are high
Yeah,
enough before you're allowed to operate. Having a race of super people who are the protagonists, I can't see any weirdness that comes with that at all. I, yeah, I agree. That was hard.
yeah.
The idea of alien tech being the source of the mechs, it happens to dovetail really with what I was thinking for Scum and Villainy. I think is really cool to like keep it weird and not totally understandable. Keep it like that there's a line between human made technology or whatever the PC races are. Oh, and me, that's a good question. The word race keeps on keeping on in role playing games, but I see some people are finally moving to like, hey, that word is insanely freaking charged. Can we not use the word race? So anyway, we don't have to have that discussion now, but aliens
Yeah,
that
there's
can be PC,
background,
yeah, or heritage, or
heritage, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
but so
sure.
the aliens that can be PCs versus the mechs come from extant source or precursors or whatever. That's I think super interesting.
Mhm. And that brings up, yeah, there are two factions not yet really explored that are either together or not, but yeah, there are the creators of these mechs, these aliens, and also, AI, both the AI that they mention, was it Alice, and because the humans in this book are extremely skeptical and fearful of AI, human created AI, and so there's both that type of AI and then this alien generated AI, so another potential source of factions, if we want to go further afield, because we never see beyond the angel, or beyond the seraphim. We don't ever actually see an alien in the novel at all.
Not to take us too far the main conversation, but what that reminds me of is and again something that I was trying to draw from to think of like how can I make this factions work in Scum and Villainy is like how superpowers or everything look in Dune, especially like say the recent Denis Villeneuve's depiction of Dune, where it feels somewhat grounded, but also like that mystery and like just alienness of the setting, and like so the Bene Gesserit of those schools, where it just does not feel like it doesn't feel like, oh, he could take me and throw me in that setting and I'd be right at home. Like, no, I would not know what the hell is going on. And it feels beautifully alien, and like the soundtrack just totally evokes that too. So yeah, in terms of yeah, that ways to like separate that out to create intentionally alien feeling elements to it, the having the technology based on that. This may be super heretical and I may be thrown out of this group immediately, and I totally deserve it, but my exposure to mech media is somewhat minimal. So I BattleTech, my brother was a huge player of, so I'm super aware of that franchise. I read Palladium Games GURP or Robotech books religiously when I was a kid, but I like the movie Pacific Rim, so I'm not super knowledgeable about potential depictions of mechs outside of all that stuff. I guess the big dividing line that I've seen drawn is between like mechs as more or less tanks versus mechs as moving fluidly, more like animals or humans, and kind of what they look like, what they feel like. It's more like a pilot, levers and very understandable technology versus interfaces, which are so far beyond what any current technology and how they're piloted and stuff. But yeah, I'm eager to help explore all that, but I don't have a ton of media exposure to it.
Yeah, and I'd say even from the anime side, there are definitely mech anime where they're less like fluid and magic. Like I even say like Mobile Suit Gundam, like that kind of, they're big heavy things and they can move around pretty well because they have powerful engines, but they're still big heavy things that like crash into stuff. And but yeah. Oh, cool. I'll make a note of it as some. Because that is also an interesting thought, because it was something for me when I was reading through the book, of like also thinking through what some tier 1 squads are, of like, there are the, fancy alien mechs, but what if there were just some squads that were like running around in like repurposed agricultural mechs?
Yeah, they're the B squad.
Yeah.
That's the equivalent of like a Ford truck with an M50 machine gun put on the
Yeah.
back. Like, look, this is not a state-of-the-art tank.
Well, because there's got to
Yeah.
be people that are making like bootleg mechs, like they're trying to catch up with this alien technology that everybody else has. So there's probably people making these bootleg mechs and like splicing stuff together and like soldering shit onto the side of like their mechs to just slap it on there.
Last week I mentioned the game Brigador, and there are actually, there are all kinds of mechs in that game, and one of the tiers of mechs are just, people who have like, I put a bunch of weapons on a minivan,
Yep.
that kind of thing. But if you want some visual inspiration, what I just put in the chat is for the game Lancer, which has a lot of really flavorful, imagery, and for a wide variety of different kinds of mechs. So
Yeah.
I don't want to play Lancer because
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I don't want to play Lancer because it's very, very like, it's not theater of the mind. It's let's have a fucking grid, and no thank you. But I do appreciate all the work they've done here. Sorry, Stephen.
Yeah, I was also gonna
gorgeous.
say I don't have a Pinterest for mechs, but if you do Pinterest mechs, there will be several Pinterest collections on on that subject.
So I
Oh man, what is
dropped
this
a little
thing?
bit and I came in halfway through what Voight was saying about just now. So I missed whatever happened gap of the last time I spoke to that point. So I don't know if there's anything of note.
So I'll just kind of go over, just to catch you up, what I have here on our palette so far. Uh, actually, let me add that. Let me clarify this one. Like a greater variety of mech. Yes, is on greater variety of mechs. Mechs that are of kind of alien precursor origin. Stone is technology. And then kind of a note that like precursors, but aliens, but also other the possibility of other aliens as PCs.
I support that.
Yeah.
I do too. I really like that idea.
Yeah.
Can I talk about what I had in mind for my character's backstory and why I would support having different people from like different aliens all across?
Sure.
Because the backstory I had in mind, because I am a big fan of Survivor, I'm thinking I wanted to go Envoy. I saw that there's like an entertainment background or that she was be like a socialite or something. I'm thinking she was to bring honor to like her family and her home planet, her home station, whatever, that she went on this competition show because she's really good at social maneuvering and she's really good with puzzles and things. And then they wound up actually having to like kind of Hunger Games, kill each other. And she wound up surviving, obviously. So she won, but like also had to endure all this trauma. And it basically, in like a really unfortunate and sad way, like grooms her for being an envoy. So that was sort of like my like story hook for that, because I had played a similar character concept. I played a College of Eloquence bard as she was a socialite, but she was not afraid to get her hands dirty. And there was a lot of trauma going on at the point that I was playing her. But now, because this is a different setting and a different situation, I'm thinking I'm aging her up and I'm playing her after she's gone through this big thing. Um, but I would like, I'm thinking they grab people from like all across the universe and they plunk them onto some remote planet. And that's like the basis of the show. And they have all these different puzzles and challenges they have to do and like vote to kill each other off. And it's super traumatic. But then I'm
I
thinking,
mean, media entertainment plays a pretty big role in the novel, so I think that
Yeah.
that totally
Right.
makes sense.
And I am
Yeah.
just thinking now of, oh god, it looks like such an awful, awful show. But I've been seeing commercials for that one of like the celebrity Navy SEAL boot camp reality TV show,
oh my gosh,
where they're
yes.
like, we have celebrities doing the Navy SEAL boot camp.
Which notably
Mhm.
just killed somebody last year, but sure,
Yeah.
how could it go wrong?
No, yeah, I'm thinking
and
there's
it's
got to
like,
be something
and
like
they have
that.
like some cut to somebody going like, and this is going to be all real risk, and I'm like, yeah, I somehow doubt that. I somehow doubt that you're going to be doing the
Right.
actual
They,
The
they literally
actual
just killed somebody
most.
last
You're
Yeah.
so
year in the boot
extra.
camp. Like, no, I don't think so. Huh.
but yeah, but that's what
So
you were making me
definitely,
think of.
that's fine. I get it. Like, no, that's totally something weird like that. And so she has this notoriety, but also all this trauma that comes with it. And so that's sort of where she's coming at being an envoy. And I think whatever powers that be that put her in that position, that's gonna play in some point with her story. But also going back to like talking about expressions of religion and Roy mentioning uh like Lovecraftian or like culty stuff. I'm totally fine with little sects of like culty boys on the side with their own space beliefs and that maybe even like disagree with the main religious core of the galaxy that we're in. That could be fun little pockets of like opposing beliefs and things.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. one thing, what I see in the know, so I'm fine with the idea of saints, and I also I like the idea of especially the created saints as a potential background, or
Mm-hmm.
I think
cloned
here it
humans.
was only
Yeah,
Saints
but
can
so yeah,
pilot
right,
mechs.
yeah. So yeah, sorry, it's just because there's a comma, there's punctuation, which is what confused me.
I'll
Yeah.
make a note. Anyone
Okay,
can
cool.
pilot a mech and just remove
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Saints for
Yeah,
now.
cool. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because I thought I think it was Chris, you mentioned possibly wanting to be an empath, right? And so leaving the option for some supernatural ability, I think is
Yeah, I wasn't excluding the idea of
cool.
supernatural
Yeah.
ability there.
Oh, speaking of, did we want to do something like creative or like explaining like kind of how we wanted to deal with the AR as something that's like exists and is in like congruence with like physical reality?
Yeah, that would certainly be interesting.
Obviously, I know what you mean by AR, but in case anybody else doesn't, would you mind saying what that is?
I believe it stands for augmented reality. It's
Mhm.
like a like kind of like tech. I'm trying to figure out what it like
So
comes
from the
from. I
novel
think it's from like,
specifically, oh, sorry, go ahead.
was that?
I was just to say, just to tell what happened in the novel that's AR, which is she gets a cybernetic implant and suddenly she has Google Maps in her eyes,
Mhm.
and it's
Mm-hmm.
telling her, and it's constantly telling her like, no, you're going the wrong way, you got to go the other way. Like, what are you doing? So yeah, I'd love to see AR in this game. Yeah.
I think I just got to that part when I stopped where she's like, "You're in the military now, and you have to do what you're told, and they're going to, in your head, be telling you when you're
Wow.
not doing what you're supposed to."
I think I'm sure it existed in other ways, but I know
Oh
there's
yeah.
a book, Neuromancer, by William Gibson, and they have this idea of the net. And I think this expired The Matrix, but like in that book, it's like the whole cyberpunk idea where you're hacking into things and you have like these like mods and stuff, but like it sort of exists in the physical world at the same time. Or like you
Yes.
can interact with people like as if they were in front of you, like in this setting as well as like kind of.
Yes.
You say so, like the hacking in, going into the virtual world,
Okay, so like a
that,
metaverse.
Yeah, kind of like a metaverse,
but
but
not
like it kind
terrible.
of exists
Yeah,
at the
yeah,
same
yeah.
time.
Yeah, so Dead Eyes and the Eiffel Tower behind us. I get you.
Well, it's a cyberpunk story, so it's kind of terrible. But yeah, it's hard to
But
explain.
well, I think I get the idea of it, and I'm sure this reference doesn't resonate with anybody, but there is a series from when I was in high school, and it was Uglies, Pretties, and Specials. And initially, these teens would go through these plastic surgeries to become pretty so that everybody looked generically pretty, but they would also get like mind implants. And then the people that like figured out how to deactivate the implants then had the opportunity to work with the government and be part of like the specials, and then they could augment themselves in different ways to enhance their personal abilities. So like self augmentation I'm fine with if we're going that kind of a route for like if you're trying to enhance your AR abilities just outside of your Mac or anything like that. I'm on board with that idea of it.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Does anyone so yeah, actually, like one question I did want to ask as we kind of start thinking about the series we want to run is what do we want the scope for this series to be? Because that is kind of a question for Beam Saber, because Beam Saber doesn't necessarily assume like a particular scope for its setting. Like it could be, this all like our run all takes place on one planet, or like an entire galaxy or something in between that. Like we could focus on one like solar system or one region of space. I'm curious, like how wide do we want to cast the scope for like imagining what our like run is going to be?
I would be fine if like maybe we had a home station in a solar system because like Roy, I do have an interest in like scum and villainy type of like the sci-fi opera stuff too, and like having your little gang going from different planets for different missions, and different ecosystems and things. I think that's really interesting. So I would be open to like a solar system specifically or something like that.
Same. I was like all of space, like Star Wars is kind of a lot,
Mhm.
but I really like um kind of like Mobile Suit Gundam Wing, where it's basically Earth and like the station, and they fight in space, but they're not really like out there all the time. Or like the Expanse, where it's basically Earth to Mars plus some extra stuff, but like it's not there's like
Mhm.
there's lots of like sandbox for like stations and stuff, but like you really don't have you're not all over the place. And it's like, yeah, no, it takes like a minute to get to Mars. We're gonna be in space for like 3 weeks, but
Yeah, I think like a lot. I think a lot of games have kind of this discussion, and I think a lot of times like if you can always expand the scope, but to the advantage of a smaller scope, that pressure cooker environment like Blades in the Dark, of course, really explicitly leans into to say like you can't get away from the consequences of your actions, and also you're seeing the people dealing with the consequences of what's happening in the setting, not like, oh, all this stuff happened on Tatooine one day, and now we're on Hoth, and who the hell knows what's going on Tatooine? It's all new NPCs. Who knows? Versus like, no, you're going to see
Mhm. Mhm.
exactly what's happening from session to session in terms of what you've done in the setting, and it's
Well,
You stole
we're
that dude's
not.
mech, and you're gonna see him next week.
Yeah,
right.
because we're mech pilots. We're not space pirates. So we're not going FTL travel across the galaxies. We are staying within like a certain system where we know the stations we have pull with people. We have our connections very much in the Forge in the Dark, Blades in the Dark vibe of like using your connections to curry favor or to enhance your crew, things like that. So I want to keep it manageable, but also within a solar system. I mean, you could have as many planets as you really wanted, but just keeping it within that same system, I think, is important because we're not doing like jump gate travel or anything crazy. I don't think.
Yeah, I'm actually thinking now of, because this is a kind of thing that comes up in the novel itself, and might be an interesting way to kind of make that pressure cooker that you brought up, Roy, is that there is this, like, what if this system is, because they kind of bring up this siege that is going on, and like is the system like actually under an active state of siege such that like people can't just leave the system and go somewhere else during the war? Like this is a conflict going on under the system that people can't just walk away from because they're stuck here for the moment.
There's a really obscure sci-fi movie I saw where there's like this embargo around this planet by this like trade federation group, and I'm just kidding, but like somehow creating creating a man-made or whatever a sentient creature made pressure cooker. Like it's maybe it could expand beyond that, but not right now because nothing can get in or out. That's a cool idea. I don't know if how much of interest this theme is. I think it's touched on in the book, but the haves and have-nots, socioeconomic bourgeoisie and the proletariat, like, and Chris mentioning Expanse and the Belters versus the Inners, or Firefly, the Alliance versus the Browncoats. Like, I guess what I was thinking for my Scum and Villainy game is that access to technology is part of what props up the regime. And so like you have like, even as I'm looking through Pinterest and there's beautiful, slick, very sci-fi technology, like that's somebody who has access to technology. And then you get like more like almost post-apocalyptic looking, kludged together, Star Warsy, dirty, bulky technology. Like that's people who do not have access to this special technology.
Yep,
So
yep.
this, in a kind of a visual way to represent haves and have-nots, and that the agendas of or technology or the aliens or whatever is not necessarily understood, and maybe there's some horrifying compromises being made to have access to technology, weapons that allow domination, but and then you have people that are collaborating with them to gain access to that power and technology, versus like everybody else is just kind of getting by. And that, so maybe that the PCs are more on a near future type technology. Like, what if us today were suddenly thrown into an interstellar setting, just trying to take NASA technology or a little past NASA technology and make a go of it in a science fictional universe, and then alien technology that we just can't understand is out there as well. But anyway.
Mhm.
Cool. Yeah. And I want to check, so does anyone else have anything they will kind of wanted to add to our palette? Because I think we kind of locked down. Well, I should actually ask, Victor, is that kind of scope work for you?
Oh yeah, that all sounds good. I think in terms of your notes, you have stone as technology, and maybe we should just have, label it, that really there's this tension, as because I like what Roy is saying of, stone versus metal, it's the holy stone versus the man crafted, or, humanity rather
Mhm.
crafted, technology. But yeah, as Cricket said, like, yeah, I think a solar system makes sense because, we're not dealing with a real solar system. So if suddenly overnight, hey, there's another planet here, weird, okay, because we needed it in the fiction, like, yeah, cool.
Cool.
And I mean, it could be that maybe we're all pretty centered on, like I said, a central station or central planet that we all were recruited from potentially. And then we're not as familiar with the system. So maybe we don't know that there's a planet there. Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe we don't, maybe there's a new moon or a star or something that just comes out of nowhere. Where the heck did that come from? Oh, it was in the shadow of this planet forever or something. You never know.
Cool. Yeah, so to check in, is there anything anyone else wanted to add to our kind of palette for this run? Cool. I think in that case, thanks everyone for showing up, taking part in the discussion, even though most of you only read part of the book. So I'm still glad you showed up and were willing to take part. I can understand sometimes you don't want to. Sometimes I've been in the mindset that if I don't finish a book for a reading club, I shouldn't show up. But I'm still glad y'all did. Because I loved getting everyone's kind of views and takes on the book. But yeah, I'll be seeing everyone next week. But for now, I'm gonna be ending the recording here. Bye
Okay.
everyone.